Okay, we could probably, I think we can get started. I think we have, I'll call the finance committee together. I think we got at least 6 of us. Chuck, do you want to call the school committee together?
Yes, thank you. Aaron,
Here.
Carla,
Here.
John,
John or Sean?
Sean,
Oh, here, sorry.
John,
Here.
Tom,
Here.
and Chuck. Thank you, Ed.
No worries at all. I don't. It's only just you, Karen, from the select board. So, all right. So we can get started. I know that we might have a couple people kind of come in a little bit later, but and I know and I got a word that Jean won't be able to join this one. So I think we have everyone but Mark and Andrew, I think. Sorry, just kind of going through this real quick to make sure I got everybody. Okay. Yeah. So why don't we get started? So you're going to call the FINCOM meeting together, round 3 of the financial forum, of a scheduled 3-rounder. I don't think there's going to be a 4th round to financial forum, much to hopefully people's appreciation and not dismay. So I think maybe to start off, and I think just kind of going off the agenda is kind of a revenue update, from Bob, from you and Sharon.
For Sharon or Ed, do you want me to share the presentation on my screen?
Yeah, it's probably a good idea. I have a hard copy, but that's not going to do anyone any good that's watching.
Does that look okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon, we can't hear you. I don't know if you're on mute.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for joining.
Ed, could I slide in and call the select board to order, please?
Oh, of course, Mark. Yeah, I didn't see it come on there. Sorry, apologies.
No worries. Thanks. Select board called to order.
Thank you, Mark.
Sharon, do you want me to do this if we can't hear you? You can just nod. Yeah, we just can't hear you. There's a lot of background noise. It sounds like maybe it's your connection. Well, I'll go ahead, and Sharon, make a face if I say something that's not right. I don't think there's a lot that's changed since the last time. I think it was 2 times ago we discussed. Property taxes still include the new growth that you guys saw for the warrant report. State aid is probably worth a short discussion. Let's see, the governor did file a budget a week or so ago, House 2. And it had the big numbers, so to speak, the school aid chapter 70 and the unrestricted local numbers that were discussed previously. And it filled in around the edges some minor costs or minor revenues, actually both. So the net result of state aid matched what we had budgeted, what we had recently amended the budget to in round numbers. No worries there. There was some good news that Gail just got, I want to say maybe even on Friday, that the circuit breaker was again in the budget at 70%. And in recent years, sometimes it's been lower. I remember as low as 60%. And that was $145,000 improvement in our special ed costs. And that's part of the accommodated costs, which we'll discuss later. But nonetheless, that came out of at the same time of the governor's budget that was released. So again, to step back at the revenue picture, we're looking at a 3% increase right here with all the different pieces of revenue we have, including a new growth number that was good. And then free cash, to be discussed. If no free cash is used, we're looking at a 0.9% increase in revenues. Is that anything else, Sharon? You want to? No, that looks good. Okay, thanks. Any questions from anyone on revenues? Really not much change. Okay, if no questions, I'll go into accommodated costs, which this is the first time you will have seen these. And again, thanks to some information from Gail, it changed as recently as Friday. There's a couple shaded areas that I'll discuss in more detail, but accommodated costs, on the top line are 3.9%. That's not bad historically, but again, it's bigger than this number here. So the revenues are going up 3%. Less if we don't use free cash, and the accommodated costs are going up a little more than that. I'll follow this with a slide on benefits. You can see that's the biggest jump. Energy a bit smaller, and special ed out of district also smaller. And I don't know if that includes the change, but that's okay. Last spring, we discussed a significant change in the retirement assessment. The initial assessment was something like a 30% increase last spring or last winter when things looked okay. And the retirement board did agree to reduce that. But future increases were then pegged at 6.5% a year. So that will be an ongoing challenge until we reduce our retirement obligation, which I think is FY21. I know it's less than 10 years. I'm going to say about 7 or 8 years from now. So that'll be an annual challenge. OPEB, we cut it to 100,000 for this year to balance the budget. I don't know what else to suggest, so I'm just suggesting 100,000 as a starting point this year. As we get into the spring for the current year, certainly if we have surpluses in health insurance, which I believe we will, one of the uses for that historically has been described as to increase the OPEB contribution. So, although it's only 100,000 and we prefer it to be $500,000 or more, that can change during the year.
Bob, so when do you typically know or start to kind of get that read on that? Because I recall that from last year, but I'm just unclear on when the timing of that happens.
In terms of health insurance, we now have 4 months of actual into the year. So, we learn a little bit more each month. This year is especially challenging, and I haven't really seen it in the numbers yet because of COVID and because of some different leaves that are available. There will be some employees that are on a 12-week leave and still receive benefits, and they will need to be replaced by employees that may receive benefits. So these are primarily school employees, and I know John or Gail could speak to that. So we haven't seen much of an impact on that yet, but but we may. We have received some credits that employees will learn about the next week or two. Maya has given us a one-time reduction in premiums because honestly, people stopped going to the doctor last February, March, and April unless they really had to. So our utilization of health services had dropped. So that was good news. Unemployment is an impossible number to predict. We have seen a lot of unemployment fraud, as I'm sure you read about it in the newspaper. We have also been told that any unemployment money that's real, or costs that are real, that are above our typical payments, would be covered by federal payments by the CARES Act. So, as a guess, we'll just start it at what, 75,000, which is kind of a long-term average. It's way too soon to really know much about what future health insurance will be, and that's going to definitely be a question mark. I don't think we're going to know a lot more even in April or May. But they have to set, or at least historically have set premiums and announce the pool rates at the end of January, and then the specific community rates usually by the third week of February, which sort of ties into FinCom's budget process to some degree. So we're putting in a relatively small increase because, again, we know this year, or we think this year, there will be a surplus. I have not even heard a wild guess as to what health insurance might cost next year. I don't think anyone knows. And you can see the rest of the numbers are quite small. So it's really the retirement number that drives this with a little bit of help from the health insurance. Yeah, Ed?
And so, and then when you did the OPEB piece, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you might have just said it and I missed it, but so which one of those out of retirement or health like circles back to OPEB?
Okay.
Which one?
A past, I can't remember if it's a FinCom policy or just kind of a broad discussion. The OPEB annual contribution is not technically put anywhere until town meeting votes it in the spring.
Okay.
So it's allocated to this line. But then if it's needed for mid-year health insurance costs, because we've under budgeted, then, you know, historically $500,000 has been available, which is another reason why you can perhaps be a tiny bit conservative on, you know, a guess at what the increase would be. And then, you know, conversely, and this has happened, I can remember 2 or 3 times, if there's a surplus in health insurance, then one option is to increase the OPEB contribution.
Okay.
Sometimes we've used it for snow and ice. Sometimes we've used it for OPEB. Some years there hasn't been any. So OPEB is kind of a, you know, a cushion, if you will, that can go in either direction.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
And when the pension retirement is, you know, back to a normal contribution, then we have always said that we would increase the OPEB contribution to the actual figure over probably a 20 or 30 year defeasance. And last I knew, that number was just under $2 million, 1.7, something like that.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to talk about tonight is debt and capital. You know, the annual changes really aren't all that meaningful. 9% looks like a big jump. Remember that in the current year, before town meeting, you know, may agree with you and add this capital spending. We had cut capital spending, capital and debt spending to 4.2% compared to the FinCom 5% policy. And this capital, if approved by November town meeting, would bring that back to 4.6%. So I want to talk about that shortly. And then, you know, this thing here I want to talk about shortly. But then, just to put it on everyone's horizon, there is unissued debt, unapproved debt. These issues have not yet gone to town meeting. They would typically, probably a year from now in November, possibly a year and a half from now in April. 2 projects have been on the capital plan that will need to have, you know, good community discussion as to whether we want to continue. One is a $4.5 million energy improvements project, and one is an above ground downtown improvements project. And I just want to call to your attention that, you know, those are not money that are committed yet, so that they could be moved out. In terms of the FY22 capital, your policy calls for almost 3.2 million, and that's what the budget tonight shows you. As you can see right here, 3.2 million. And here's, you know, sorted by cost, here are the different components. One of the things I alluded to previously was, you know, FinCom may choose to relax the 5% again next year to some smaller numbers. And I've just used the smallest number, if you will, to what happened in June for the current year, 4.2%. That would mean cutting $700,000 out of this list. With again, the theory that we can always come back to capital in the middle of the year if we have, you know, a better financial situation. So one of the things that FinCom could discuss tonight is, do we reduce the amount of capital since debt is already spent and go below the 5%? And, you know, should we come to it, we'll try to have a discussion about this in terms of priorities. I will say that one option, which would not be my first choice, but certainly it is an option, is we could borrow for the ladder truck. We could split this $1.3 million over, let's say, even 2 years, and that would free up $600,000 in the current year, should we choose to do that. But if we do that, we're then crowding out spending in the next fiscal year, because right now that number is also balanced to 5%, and we'd have to push, $650,000 of capital that's listed in the next year, FY23, further out, which is certainly doable. No worries there. So that's the easy option. The harder option is, to decide, do you want to make a reduction? And any of these reductions we can figure out. And this is just a list again of the capital. Sharon showed this to you a couple of meetings ago. This is the reserve position. It's not changed. $15 million of free cash is not yet certified. $17 million total, certainly well above your FinCom policy. I put this in here for you guys to review. It's also, Sharon did this last time. We still do not know down here, what's going on in FY20. And that brings us to, kind of the discussion point of the night in addition to capital. With those revenues and with those accommodated costs, here are the net operating budgets with different free cash scenarios. So if FinCom chooses to use no free cash, the operating budgets will lose 0.3%. If the objective is a 0, 250,000 will do it. The typical range of $1 million to $1.5 million would yield budgets of 1.25% to 2%. And then here's some higher figures. The current year, we're using just a touch over 2%. I'm sorry, 2 million. 2 million next year right now would look like a 2.75% operating budget. And FinCom had discussed previously, maybe this is a year to load on. I'd certainly be cautious with that, but I felt like I should show you the numbers. And there they are. 3.5% historically is, I guess I'll say, a comfortable number for the school in town. It does not accomplish everything that we would like to do by any means, but it does not usually require cuts. And I can certainly say in the town side, it would not require cuts. So, there are your choices for free cash, but remember that if you reduce capital, you're also adding some money into the operating budgets. So, if you decided $1 million of free cash would be good, and then another $500,000 reduction in capital, then you'd be looking at not this number, but this number here, 2%. And it's hard to, we'll balance the budget to whatever is needed. On the one hand, we'd want to be really cautious about adding costs and relying on free cash, and we say that every year, and this year's no different. But I agree with Nick and some other folks' remarks last year that it is raining. This is the rainy day. This is why you have free cash. So let's not go crazy trying to scrimp and save. And I kind of agree with that too. So any number on this page, certainly in the lower half, would be manageable. And I'm sure that if you have more detailed questions, both myself and John Doherty can provide some color.
So I do see a hand raised here, but I'll stop you right there. Just Carlo, I see your hand raised. I'm not hearing you, Carlo. I don't know if anybody else is.
No, we're not.
Yeah, so it looks like Carl's still having some problems on his end. I'll keep an eye out, Carlo. Just jump and holler if it gets fixed. I don't see anybody else with their hand raised. but we can, kind of open it up, kind of for discussion. Thanks for that, Bob. It was, again, helpful. So, as a, do we want to kind of, kind of which part of this, to start on? Do we want to start on looking at the capital and debt piece, or if I'm kind of going in order, that looks like the, the first one, kind of open up discussion on that. But we could also, look towards the free cash discussion too, either or. Why don't we start, but just by looking at that one analysis that Bob and Sharon provided on the projected FY 21 to 23 capital and debt, and the analysis that he provided there. I mean, basically just open up discussion for the committee.
It might also be helpful, I'm going to share a screen just quickly, so FinCom has a better sense of the full capital plan, not just the next year or so. I'll just share it briefly. So those of you that have received your town meeting warrants, you'll see this in the appendix. Here is the current year, showing that extra money if town meeting agrees. 4.4%. This is the 5% more or less for this year. And at 5% going forward, based on estimated revenues, we have a surplus in the capital plan. Now, new capital expenses appear at any moment, so that's not totally shocking. But I will say this is a healthy capital plan. But again, there was some discussion a couple weeks ago that these projects here are not in the capital plan. And I'm certainly happy to do that as part of the annual budget process. This $10 million of projects not listed certainly can be figured out and put in this capital plan that has a $12 million surplus. So I did want to speak to that also.
Any questions, comments? Mark Doxer.
Thanks, Ed. You guys able to hear me?
We can, yes,
Cool.
thanks.
Thank you. So Bob, I guess if one of the things you're asking is in terms of how to show the capital plan, do you want to show that large accumulated surplus and the projects aren't yet identified that could fill that, or would it make sense to put some of those projects in now? And I guess I would chime in that I think I'd love to see the community get to weigh in on a number of the priorities before we decide which of those projects should take place. And it might be better to do it pretty much as you have outlined now, where you're showing that there is going to be this accumulated surplus, and there are going to be a queue of projects that conceivably could use it. And once those priorities are decided, we can decide what they are. I think that, to me, that makes sense and allows the community to give good input on priorities.
Carl, I'll check in real quick again, see if you have any audio, because your hand's still raised. I'm not bullish on it, but I'll try it again. I'll move on to Tom.
Thanks, Ed. I generally agree with Mark's premise. I think I would only add one filter on top of that, or one point of information that maybe Bob and Dr. Doherty can add in, which is some of those look like they might be there from a safety perspective and reason, and it's not just a nice to have necessarily. So if there's anything in there that's necessary for, or will be coming due, and I'm thinking of the fields, I'm thinking of, obviously I've got the school related slant to it, but if the fields at Parker, which needs a replacement, the stadium track and turf that will need replacement, the field house floors and bleachers that might need replacement from a safety perspective, if there's a timeline that we need to get those done, then I think that would be good to understand as part of that decision, right? Getting other feedback for the rest of it, I think is valid, but if there's a safety concern, I think that needs to go ahead of any other feedback that we have coming into that loop.
Yeah, I can say on the left-hand side, you see the not funded 10 million. Those a couple of years ago were put in the rough order of priority. And the first two, absolutely, and the third one maybe speak to safety. So the stadium turf, is in need of repair. It was not as urgent as turf 2, but not too many years behind. And then the field house floor and the bleachers are also at some point a safety issue.
Yeah, I would agree with Bob on that. That the turf one and the track and the ropes course, which we've had to patch up a couple of times, and the floor and bleachers would be safety issues.
And Ed, if I may,
Yeah.
do we have any idea of timelines on those safety issues? Are they currently safety issues and we should push to get them earlier in this plan? Or are they safety issues that will show up in a 2 or 3 or 5 year horizon? I mean, that you mentioned the ropes course, Dr. Doherty, but the other ones, how critical of a need are they, I guess, from our perspective?
I would say turf one is got a shelf life of a couple of years. And the track, that would be part of it. Based on the study that we had done a couple of years ago.
So then to that end, if these are those numbers, does it make sense? And would the rest of the greater group, and especially FINCOM, agreed that we should at least slot in turf 1, track and ropes, maybe starting in 2023, with appropriate planning to come forward before town meeting for the warrant and all that kind of fun stuff, and maybe April of 2023, so that it can be done over the summer, somewhat similar to what we tried to do with Parker, or maybe even earlier if necessary. And not Parker, but turf 2.
Yeah, we could certainly do that. For that amount, I'm sure we'll show it as debt service and smooth out some other things. We could certainly do that.
Thanks, Tom. Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So to follow up on the comments from Tom and Dr. Doherty, so it's helpful for me to understand when I look at this list, and Tom, thanks for that point. It was helpful. I see about 7 million if I add those up. So I'm just trying to get a sense of where we're going on the capital plan, and we have, the town manager with Bob and Dr. Doherty and the school committee kind of as a subject matter experts that that I rely on, at least in these conversations, to understand what the near term, I'll call them near term, meaning next, kind of 1 to 3 years, maybe like priority capital investments that we need to make. So I'm interested, just somebody on the school side, to kind of give a sense of, am I getting that right? If I add items 1, 2, 5, and 6 on the screen share from Bob here, I get about 7.2 million. And I'm hearing on the school side that these are potentially safety related and, kind of next 1 to 3 years. So I'd like someone from the school side to confirm that or correct that. And then Bob, on the town side, I saw the ladder truck, you talked about that. Are there other items that you have this slide that was in the packet for us? Help us understand similarly, what are the things? So I'm trying to look at this free cash budget and kind of in my mind, kind of earmark some of the funds for things that maybe we don't commit this year, but that we would expect to see next year. So that we have a sense of kind of what, because that's the piece we don't have here, right? We have the proposals of 0 to 2.5 million in free cash, right? As that Bob's laid out really nicely. And then we have the 4.2 to 5% range for capital and debt, which was also laid out really nicely. So that can go up to 3.2 million. And the free cash side, we could go up to 2.5 million, right? But can someone in the school side give me a sense of what I'll call near-term priorities? And Bob, on the town side, your near-term priorities for the capital plan. Thanks.
Nick, are you talking about the not funded?
Yeah, I'm looking at the not funded, exactly. So I'm looking
Okay.
at 1, 2, 5, 6, and I add them up, I get like 7 and change, right? And it's a lot of money, 7.2, something like that. And I heard you, Dr. Daugherty, talk about and Tom talk about kind of safety related, kind of infrastructure, student safety, community safety issues. Can you help us understand if those are as simple as just picking out line items, or is there more nuance to it where a portion of a line item would be characterized as safety related?
Sure. 1 and 2 are definitely safety related. I can't speak to Parker. Really, that's not under our care and custody. Coolidge would be a nice to have because it would expand the use of fields that we currently have available for the community and the schools. But definitely 1 and 2 from a school department perspective. I do want to also caution you that those numbers are probably a couple years old now, so my guess is they may be a little bit higher.
And the last that we had addressed, Parker, it's not in any hurry at all. It was on the capital plan probably 6, 7 years out. We just removed it, so it's not urgent. And then Coolidge, I'd have to say, is a nice to have. There isn't one now. Do you want to add it? Of all the things you mentioned for the town side, the ladder truck is clearly the first priority. And remember that I mentioned 2 other debt items that they don't show up on this list because they're projected as being debt. And they'll have a $600,000-700,000 annual cost if we do them. And it's the energy improvements and the downtown streetscape improvements. Those should also be sort of factored into your thinking right now as to how urgent. And it's really hard to say, but offhand, I'd say the energy improvements are probably ranked pretty high on that list because they will save money, just like the ladder truck, in addition to safety, will save maintenance.
Any follow-up questions on your side, Nick?
No, that was very helpful. Thanks.
Nope, perfect. Karen, I see you next with your hand raised.
Thank you. I would like to, so as I'm looking at this list of capital projects, and they're all big, and there's a lot of fields on there, which then brings to mind the Community Preservation Act. So I was doing a little surfing while I was listening to others' responses. And so I believe artificial turf cannot be purchased with Community Preservation Act funds, but a lot of the regular fields can be worked using those funds. A lot of the infrastructure related to those fields can be used with those funds. I would like to strongly propose to this group, because these financial forums were put together as a leadership forum to, and getting back to Mark's comment, if we have community priorities, I would love to see this group get together and say, the community would like us to do this. We only have so much to spend on this, but perhaps we can take a leadership role in starting to think about putting a CPA Act in place for our community so that we get these capital projects moving. It is one of the few state programs that would allow us to make some forward progress. So I'm just going to put that out there. By the way, the survey that has just come up from the open space and recreation does ask if people are interested in the Community Preservation Act. So as we get the word out there about that, I would strongly encourage people to take that survey, give their feedback. And then Bob, if we're going to be presenting a new fire truck to proposal to town meeting, and even in this body, I have never seen the numbers, although I have also heard from the assistant chief that the maintenance numbers, and I understand he told me he shared them with you, and it was a clear case that the ladder truck is costing more in maintenance than it's, and I see all the notes about it being constantly out of service or, out for service. So would you be able to share numbers with this group and potentially town meeting about what we're paying in service so that we can see that making a capital investment in a fire truck not only will address some safety concerns because it's constantly in the shop, but also, ideally could also save us some money by, not allowing us to eliminate these maintenance costs.
Sure, we shared that last spring when the item was moved up in the capital plan, and we'd certainly do it again.
Okay, that might be a good idea. And I apologize, I don't remember seeing that last spring. I don't remember seeing any kind of maintenance cost showing the payoff for an investment in a new fire truck. I would love to see that again. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Karen. Chuck.
Thank you, Ed. I just wanted to comment on the fields as well. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, and I mean, Dr. Doherty made the comment. I mean, those numbers are old, so I don't want to plug a number in the capital plan until I want to hear from the athletic director first of all, and Gail Dowd and Joe Huggins as to what's a realistic number to put in there, rather than, and maybe it's the numbers we have, but we haven't done that in a while, and I don't think it would be prudent to put those numbers anywhere until we revisit those costs with the appropriate staff.
Thanks, Chuck. Do we have an idea of how old they are again? Did someone mention that? Did you, Dr.
When
Doherty,
we
did you
did
mention that?
turf 2, so probably 2 years ago now.
Yeah,
Okay.
when we did turf 2, or was it? Yeah.
I was gonna say, we got the estimates at the same time we were doing turf 2. We had them survey each of the fields, so that would have been the last time we did an analysis on stadium, track, and the field house floor and bleachers.
Yeah, so Chuck, the numbers aren't that old, but honestly, since last March, there's no telling what anything might cost. You have to look.
I mean, and there wasn't a significant amount of discussion on the field house floor. In fact, almost zero discussion on that, as I remember. So that one, I don't have any idea what that is. So, I mean, you're right about the turf. I mean, that had a lot of discussion.
Thanks, Chuck. Carlo.
All right, is this better?
Hey, look at that. All right, we're going.
All right, I switched computers last night. It worked for our meeting, but anyway, hello everyone. Sorry I was late. Karen already addressed some of my comments and concerns about the fire truck, but I was curious if Bob knew or anyone here knew, how long would it take to get a new fire truck?
Greg's on the call. Historically, it's about a year, but that's from putting together a group of employees to look at the options all the way through the actual purchase and receipt of it. Is that about right, Greg?
Yes, it would take a year because it would have to go out to bid, and then after the contract is awarded, you go through a pre-construction with the vendor, and then it goes into production. So that takes a few months to get through that, and then it's at least 9 to 10 months for production.
So,
Not for them to make it, for them to get it into their queue in order to be built.
Right, so given that, that's a much longer than I thought it would take, but, and I remember last year at town meeting that this was brought up, and it you know, like Karen said, our maintenance costs that we get to see in the truck being out, we don't have the hard numbers, but the truck has been out quite a bit since I've been on the board for 6-7 months. So as far as I know, this is already approved, right? This money's been allocated for the truck, so why are we not ordering it?
Well, it's actually just listed in the capital plan as a request for next year. So it's not approved for this year. It's a request for FY22.
Oh, so last year we didn't approve it at town
That's
meeting.
correct. It was put into the capital plan, but not for the first year.
Okay, all right, thank you. And another few items I saw on the, over a number of years, the downtown improvement and the energy improvements. Are those on top of things? Is that a wish list, or is that, what would be a downtown improvement that would be $2 million spread over a number of years? What would that look like?
I don't have a list in front of me, but I know we identified actually over $7 million of improvements. And the state put us on a bond bill last, I don't know, January, February for $5 million. That's not going to get funded anytime soon, and that's why there was $2 million left. So that item clearly needs a tremendous amount of community discussion as to what's important. And it would have before COVID, and it even requires more after COVID. The timing was such that when the underground work is done in the downtown area and there's debt authorization requests at this town meeting. So we're still a good 2-3 years away from needing to know the answer above ground. So because of COVID, I'm going to say that at least it's the thing I showed you earlier is pushed out a year for the downtown item. The energy improvements is harder to know. But there's got to be, I want to say, out of the $4.5 million, maybe $3 million worth of boiler improvements and capital improvements that otherwise would have been in the plan, and then some space for things that are identified. And again, with future discussion to be improvements that the town wishes to pursue, whatever it may be.
Thank you. And one last thing, will the survey in any way be incorporated into town meeting, the results? So town meeting can discuss it or not?
The survey for the
Sorry,
CPA?
for open space and recreation, sorry.
I think it's open for past town meeting. I want to say late November it's open until, if anyone else knows.
Okay. All right, because I know Mark mentioned, you know, community input, Mark Doxer, and community input and you know, having community involvement in those discussions. But I mean, to me, that's what town meeting is for. And it's helpful, obviously, but hopefully the survey will shed some light on some things. And we have Birch Meadow to deal with, and we have so many things to deal with that all we can do is pick a few and address them. So I'm hoping that the survey will produce some input, but I think town meeting is the body that is allocating money and should prioritize what we should be doing. And, you know, with these turf situations and other things that are down the road, I mean, there's only some, you know, we learned from turf 1 that if we wait too long, it hurts the town and other opportunities. So, I mean, turf 2 we've got done. Turf 1, I don't think we should put off too much longer. Thanks.
Yeah, just to be clear, for all the items that are being discussed right now, only the ladder truck is planned as a capital expense. The rest are on the, you know, I should say next year. The rest are, you know, either not planned or put in a future year. But it's important when you're talking about capital to discuss it well in advance, certainly.
Thanks, Carlo. Vanessa.
Thanks, Ed. When we talk about replacing the turf fields, have any discussions been had about moving away from turf and back to natural grass? The reason I ask is I know that some of the trees around the Parker Field over the years since the turf has gone in have started to die off. And there have been sort of environmental concerns that have been raised about turf fields. The health implications are questionable at this point, but has that been discussed at all?
In terms of the health angle, that was discussed quite a bit before Turf 2 was done, and the type of product being used for Turf 2 was identified and differentiated from some of the concerns that were out in the public. We have not had a discussion in a while about going back to grass. We can certainly do that. One of the challenges will be it'll greatly reduce the playability and the time the field is available. But I have to say that when we first discussed turf fields 10 odd years ago, the cost and the lifespan of turf fields were thought to be much better than they've turned out to be. So, you know, it's something that we should always kind of look at and evaluate from many perspectives.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Nick.
Thanks, Ed. I had a couple more questions for someone on the school side. In the packet for today, maybe Bob, you can share the slide. It's slide 7, which is the accommodated costs. I noticed there's when we get there, I noticed two line items there that I wanted to ask about. There's 2 school related items. There's an out of district placement for special education, and then the vocational school contribution. In the second last 2 lines. So my question is, I see the increase of these two at kind of a, particularly the special education out of district placement at a increasing at a rate that is historically higher than the rest of the school committee budget in my experience. And so, 5% is a fairly significant increase. The absolute number isn't completely huge. I wanted to my question is whether the circuit breaker award, going back to slide 5, where it said circuit breaker at 75%, does that circuit breaker award change the rate of increase of either of those school related expenses in slide 7?
Gail, do you want to answer that? Or do you want me to answer it?
I thought Bob was doing a great job
I
on
was
mute.
talking, but I muted myself. Right here is the impact of that additional circuit breaker money.
Okay, so that's baked into the numbers that we're looking at.
That is in this number, and I don't think anyone has a good estimate of what out-of-district special ed costs will be for next year.
And and the other point I had, both to this, Bob, what you just said and what Chuck said earlier, is I don't have any impression that the numbers will be lower when it comes to education. That's my working assumption. It may not be always accurate, but my assumption is that whether we're looking at kind of infrastructure capital estimates that are older, pre-COVID, and we're looking at out of district special education, I don't expect the numbers to be lower. They could be higher, but I don't expect them to be lower. So this 5% increase is post circuit breaker, Bob.
Again, this number here includes the circuit breaker number, and then this is a following year, the 5%. Okay. So this is a 5% assumption, except for a good circuit breaker. And you're right, the Voc school number, we just got some updates in the last day or two, both John and I, and there's no question there's increased enrollment at the Voc schools for the current year. We'll have to see how that works going forward.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Nick. Mark Doxler.
Thanks, Ed. Sorry. Two quick, I guess, one question and one kind of follow up to what Karen was talking about. First one on the town hall generator for health. I'm assuming that's for vaccines and things like that. So we have a backup in case power goes out and the refrigeration system has a backup.
That would be correct.
Okay. So given the likelihood that there's going to be more vaccine activity going on in the future. Two questions. One is, can we make sure that that generator would have a lot of capacity, a lot of extra capacity versus what we have right now, or what we need right now? And then a second question probably goes to the Board of Health in asking if we have to get down to colder temperatures, which is one of the options that might happen. We may want to start thinking about that as a kind of a plug item. Board of Health and requirements like that. And just trying to think a little bit ahead. Don't know what's going to happen, but at minimum, we should get extra capacity in that generator in case we've got some heavy duty refrigeration going on.
Yeah, Mark, I'd have to say that right now, the practice of if we lose power, Gene or someone else has to drive in and bring it home and put it in their own refrigerator. So that's the current practice. That's with flu vaccine, no big deal. With any kind of COVID vaccine, I'd have to say we use the police station that has a generator and we just deal with it there. It's also secure.
Got it. Yeah. So it may be that it's a separate topic of thinking about very cold refrigeration needs.
You know, it's still generally the same topic, but you know, this generator's been in the plan for a few years. Whether it really belongs in town hall, depending on where the health division ends up, is a fair question also.
Okay, so maybe we just put that on the radar. Second point, if I could, was I want to support what Karen was talking about with the Community Preservation Act. I think that this group is the right group to have some discussions about it, the pros and the cons, and to investigate what would be involved in doing it. It had gone through, I won't go through the whole history because I don't know the whole history, but at one point the town had a chance to do it, decided not to. In the intervening years, the amount of money that the state had that they could contribute back to the communities that were members started to drop. But last year, they raised the fees on deed registrations. And what happened is suddenly there's a huge influx of money that has come back into the CPA. So the communities that are participating in it are able to propose projects. And Karen was talking about some of the fields and things in community, any community project in general, that we might be able to get some money for. And I think that the right way to think about that would be probably for the financial forum or members of the elected boards and appointed boards would get together and start looking into it, having a discussion about it, and then kind of maybe bring it back to the group before. I think it actually has to go for a townwide vote if it's going to happen. But I think this would be the right group to get it going. So Karen, thanks for bringing that up. I think it's a really interesting thing to look at. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Sean Brandt.
Thanks, Ed. I'm just thinking about that list of items on the capital plan that we think are likely to, to find their way onto the actual budget for the next, the next, say, 2 to 5 years. And there's a school of thought that would say, if debt is cheap, which it is, if your financial footing overall is pretty solid, which ours is, and if the market for something that you're going to buy in the not too distant future is soft, that you should lever up and accelerate some of those things. And so something to maybe think about is, do we kick the tires on some of those projects and get an understanding? My intuition would be the market for major municipal projects is probably pretty weak right now, and there might be some opportunity there. And so maybe we kick the tires on what we get for pricing on some of those projects and try and think about, accelerating them a year or two ahead of where we would have, even if it means incurring debt, because given the cost of debt right now, that might make us better off over a pretty short time frame.
Thanks, Sean. I think it's those other facts that you laid out are absolutely correct. I think that's one of the advantages of being in the position that we are, is that you take advantage of you're a little bit more opportunistic when you can be. Thanks, Sean. Vanessa.
Thanks, Ed. Bob, I have a vague recollection of discussions of the Voc Tech school being rebuilt and the cost that would be incurred by all the cities and towns who send students there, and that would be based off of enrollment. I vaguely recall that from last year. Has there been any update on the status of that and how the town of Reading would be affected and how we would cover those expenses?
Obviously it's slowed down, but they're projecting to spend over $200 million to rebuild the Voc school. They have not asked for community's vote yet, which is one of the requirements. They're still in the preliminary, I guess I'll say, design phase. Once they come to us with a final proposal and ask us to vote, we'll have obviously much better information. There was a rumor and there was an effort by a couple cities, I'll say a few years ago, to just spread the costs differently than enrollment, and that has been met with resistance legislatively. It will be by enrollment. That would make an enormous difference to Reading. We have very small enrollment, so that, when I looked at it, it was $100,000, maybe $150,000 a year increase. Not insignificant, but not a budget breaker. And the other part is, I don't know. It's going to be prescriptive. They because of I think it's Chelsea, they get enormous state aid on the project. The SBA reimburses somewhere north of maybe 70%. So 30% of 200 million is still a big number, but certainly not as much as it could be. And I don't know if COVID has changed any of that approach. That would certainly be an important question. But we're at least, I'd say, 2 years off from actually seeing an expense because we have not been asked to approve it yet.
Great. Thanks very much, Bob.
Thanks, Vanessa. Mary Ann.
Hi, yes, thanks. I wanted to go back to that projected fiscal year 21-23 capital and debt, just so I understand, was this conversation going that we're trying to look for maybe $700K in reducing the capital requests to be consistent with June 2020 cuts? I just want to understand that before I ask my question.
Are you asking my opinion?
I guess I don't know whether that's the goal of the group or in your opinion too.
In my opinion, we're in much better financial shape than many, and we should not cut capital as much as we did in June when we just had a lot of uncertainty. But I think it's entirely reasonable to consider cutting capital by some amount because it's so easy to add it back in the middle of the year compared to operating money.
Okay, so then I just did have a question, probably I guess for the town and school side on a few of the items on there. And I know in this Zoom environment, it's probably crazy to question any tech spending, but I just wanted to know more about, like, say with the schools, the school network tech and school phones, because I know we just spent a whole bunch of money with the with the grant on a lot of technology, I believe. Gail can correct me on that. And I'm just curious about, I think that would be $65K in phones. Because when I go look at, like, if I'm reading the fiscal year 21 budget correctly, in our 570K or so of technology, I mean, like 400 of that is salaries, 100 is contract services, and at that time only 62K was in all of our supplies and other expenses, and here we are asking 65K for phones. So I just wanted to know more about that, and also what do they expect to be using the school and network tech for 100K each? Thank you.
Bob, do you want me to jump in quick on the school side?
Sure.
So, Marian, thank you for that. There are two different parts of it. What we have done when you saw the grant funding and the operating budget, that is day-to-day technology. So that's the laptops, that's the software, that's the ongoing licensing and maintenance. So that is not part of the capital plan. The capital plan are longer strategic term objectives. So that is typically when we, over the past couple of years, if we're upgrading our server environment, when we did the Wi-Fi project, when we're doing significant capital infrastructure items that are more one-time events, not ongoing. So that's the distinction between the two there. So typically with the 100,000 amount that we have, those are longer term strategic upgrades that we're doing to the overall environment, not the actual device side of the house. And on the phone system side, this was an area that we worked actually very closely with Bob over the past few years to come up with a plan. A lot of our phone systems, and these are not necessarily just the actual physical phone, it's the actual phone system and the bells and other intercom system that goes with it. A lot of them have been outdated and they do not all necessarily speak to each other. So we have been upgrading each of the schools over the past 3 years. And I believe next year might be the last school that we had that we needed to do an upgrade. So we have been doing one school a year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I hadn't seen this that often or to this amount. Which school is it going to be next year?
I believe, I think it's either Birch might be this year, Parker might be next year. I just need to check that. I think it might be, I just might have my years off, but actually Birch was last year, it might be Barrows. So we've gone through some of the older ones that were either systems that we sort of moved. Even when Wood End was done, it was sort of an existing system that we put in there, so we needed to upgrade it. So we were very appreciative that we were able to work through a plan to do one school a year.
Okay, thanks. And so what about on the town side?
Yeah, for the network technology, it's pretty much the same answer. It's not any kind of equipment that we use in our desktops. It's infrastructure. And although there is a plan that goes out a few years, things change and all of a sudden you have to upgrade your firewall or whatever. You know, that gives us the flexibility to make a bigger move that we certainly would not have $100,000 in our operating budget. And we've used this approach, I want to say, for about 5 years, when technology was just too hard to find the money that was needed for the network repairs. By saving up money you didn't spend on equipment during the year. So, you know, John and I discussed just putting it in the capital plan. It may have started at 75,000, I don't recall, but it's been in there for a while. And, you know, none of it on the town side is absolutely essential in any given year, but the process is very, very important. We don't want to fall behind, especially with security. You know, that's something we have to be real careful about.
Okay, that's very helpful. Just keep, it sounds like these are important to keep in the priority scheme, or at least some of them is. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thanks, Mary Ann. I don't see any other hands raised. We can kind of leave it open, you know, open it up, I guess, if anyone else, you know, kind of comments from you know, FinCom, any kind of questions or comments. As it relates to what we put out there. Any other questions? So, Bob, as it relates to, you know, kind of talking about the, you know, the operating budgets under the, you know, the kind of the free cash scenarios, you know, is that something that we, you know, as a committee need to, you know, what's the timing as far as, you know, kind of, you know, having that discussion and making those types of, you know, kind of recommendations or looking at any types of changes there, as you kind of laid out. I forget what number slide that was, but the one that you just had up, I think that was 7. that had those, the ones that are consistent with our policy and ones that would be, consistent with the June 20 cuts. What's the timing, for us, to, kind of debate and look at those different types of scenarios and make a recommendation or anything along those lines?
Ed, was your question directed at this slide or at just capital?
Actually, I was looking at the one that was just capital, actually, but actually, it's actually both. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's for both of them, really.
That's actually an interesting question. And the reason I say that is we used to present balanced budgets in the first week of December to the select board. The board found it much more helpful to just hear directly from department heads on what they thought they would need or want. So, in that sense, we don't need exact information from FinCom in order to present stuff to the select board. But in order to give us guidance on how to build operating budgets, that number is more important. So that if I can just jump ahead.
Yep.
If it'd be really, really helpful, and I'll let the schools speak for themselves, if FinCom could put a circle around some number on this page or some number not on the page and say that's your target. And whether it's achieved through free cash usage or also some capital reduction I don't think it's a decision that FinCom has to make tonight. But it just gives us both guidance on how to build budgets. We're both in contract renewal years for unions. It positions us to negotiate with the unions. It allows us to look at staffing and any changes that we might need to make. So that's really important because we're going to, again, be presenting budgets, I want to say in 5 or 6 weeks in public, and they will be helped being built by using these assumptions. Does that answer your question, Ed?
It totally does. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So given that, and maybe it's, we'll work from, I think I asked my question really out of order to Bob, but looking at the piece from, from free cash usage, and, any thoughts, from, kind of from the committee members, and maybe just have a, kind of start the dialogue a little bit around that. I know we've, over the last, couple of meetings, we've had some discussions, or we've kind of talked about this, again, I don't think we've, had something like this, and again, I think Nick and some others mentioned it, Bob, these are fantastic to have for us to kind of go through. So appreciate the work that you and Sharon and anyone else that contributed. If I forgot to list your name, a huge thanks. But as it relates to this, any kind of questions or comments from the committee members as it relates to this? I don't think you need to necessarily raise your hand or anything, but just kind of have at it.
Ed, if I might just add something.
Please.
It would also be helpful, and I'm sorry that we can't give you any guidance, but if you can give us guidance on how you want to approach the topic of COVID funding. So if we have COVID expenses that might start next July, and assuming that we don't have any sort of federal or state assistance on that, what philosophy should we use? Should we put it in the operating budget? Should we hold it aside and identify that as a maybe? And, the reason I ask is because FinCom could take a position that since that's something we don't know about, let's mentally set aside a certain amount of free cash that might cover that now as part of that thought process. Or let's, reduce capital in order to allow certain funds to be mentally set aside. I don't know if John or Gail or Joe have any color on that. I have no sense on will we need COVID expenses next July. I'm sort of thinking maybe, but I don't know.
So
I think
Bob,
from the, yeah, Sam,
sorry, go
from
ahead.
the school side, I think we're in the same boat. It's really going to depend to say whether the cleaning continues, whether PPE purchases continue. I mean, we're still bringing students back now, so we don't have a lot of insight into what it might look like July 1st.
But to piggyback on that, my guess is that there are some things that we're going to have to continue to do moving forward regardless.
So Bob, Ed, if I may.
Of course.
Yeah, the money was set aside, I think, in June for COVID. Was that put into the operating budgets of schools in town? Is that how we handled it? That's my recollection.
Yeah, I guess effectively, yes. But it was, the answer is more complicated than it needs to be. Yes, it was, but in the numbers I'm showing you, I'm assumed that money is taken away, that it is not needed.
And the 300,000 we set aside for, I think it was for FinCom to deploy, was that within the town operating budget? Is that how we handled it?
No, that's kind of a set aside in accommodated costs, and I didn't mention it because it's relatively small, but I've assumed that FinCom would go back to 200,000 next year, although none of us really know.
Mm-hmm. Is one more kind of structural question? I'm sorry, Ed, if this is okay. Just kind of big picture. Is the effect? I'm just kind of thinking big picture. The net effect of taking money out of free cash and committing it to a budget. I mean, it's to put it into. It's to make it available for operating budgets for town and school. And if that money goes unspent, it's regenerated back to free cash. If revenue comes in higher than projected, that's also added to free cash, right? So if the money is left in free cash, it would take a town meeting intervention, I'll call it, right? A request to put more money into an operating budget or a capital plan.
That's
right?
correct.
So if we leave it in free cash, I'm thinking of it as in these times, it's a reserve, it's a buffer, it's well in the amount of free cash. It's 16%, Bob. Did I recall
It's
that
a big
correctly?
number, yeah.
As opposed to 5%, 7%, which is our stated reserve for stability, right? So if my numbers are right, we've got a really good problem to have. And combined with a lot of uncertainty, right? So my thinking, just big picture on this for the group, is where I'm coming from is, without at this point, I'm interested in other people's views on how they're thinking of deploying these funds. But in my mind, if it stays in this bucket we're looking at now, it's not going to go to work for the town and the schools, absent some relatively unusual act of town meeting to deploy that money in a separate town meeting, right? So if it's sitting there, it's sitting there now. I see the capital costs that are on the horizon as well. So I think we need to consider that too. To Sean's point, I like Sean's point. The cost of borrowing is low. You may be able to negotiate and reprice some of these options. I hadn't even thought of that till Sean said, but you actually could get a better deal. Sean, until you said that, I hadn't even thought of that, but that's a great point for us to consider, that we could be opportunistic, as someone else said. So I just want to think of that I think of it like, can we put more money to work? The downside of pushing free cash in is always, if it gets absorbed and the operating budgets become dependent on that money to function, it's a dangerous trap, right? It's always, I don't like the idea of free cash going into operating budgets as a general rule, but it's not a normal time. So I'm just interested in other perspectives on this. I think there's a lot of complexity here and a lot of competing considerations.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say. And the other thing to try to think about that can't be solved is, are we on some sort of a revenue hole that's going to get better, and over what period of time? So that you could be putting free cash into an operating budget, but it might only be needed for, let's say, 2 years if revenues rebound. None of us can know that, though.
But to that point too, Bob, though, but if when things become more predictable and revenue and whether revenues rebound or don't rebound, well, then at that point, tougher decisions are needed to be made. You know what I mean? And which, I don't think anyone has been ever shy of making those tougher decisions. And, in my short time on the committee, it seems that, that those are, the tougher decisions are always on the table. And I think I think to Nick's point, as well, when you look at, and I think we all kind of espouse the same thing. You don't want to necessarily have someone, have a body be dependent and always kind of relying on free cash. But frankly, that doesn't seem like it's been the pattern. And so I think that's also important to be able to, to acknowledge, in this, in that we are looking at something that's not normal times. But always kind of having the same kind of prudent decision making that we've had as it comes to our budget and our kind of capital spending.
I think one way that the FinCom could look at this is look at this slide with 17 million and say, how much am I comfortable spending? And let's just go crazy and say 5 million. Then the next question is, all right, where do I put the 5 million? And I think you choose from, well, 1.5 million is pretty much every year we've agreed is regenerated. Who knows, but that's been the history and then some. So there's 1.5 million. And then, we're in tough times. We need to plug some revenue gaps. There's some other amount, 500,000, 1 million, I don't know. And then, gee, we'd like to do some extra projects because it's affordable. That's another way to think about this. Or we need to plug the operating budgets to give the superintendent and the town manager some flexibility. So let's go ahead and park 500,000, 1 million in the operating budgets for future COVID expenses. I think that's a reasonable way to look at this, but I have no idea what the right numbers are.
Yeah, and I do think that percentage, and I think this was something that we talked about that kind of came out of the audit committee. Is from a bond perspective. It's like I thought that number, and maybe Mark Doxer knows this. He seems to call these numbers better than I do. I thought it was like 12%. Was the number there? But I might be wrong. But actually, I see that Mark's got his hand raised. But maybe he can both ask his question and also correct my my record as well.
Thanks, Ed. I think the number was kind of that 10 to 12% range is what their recommendation was. That's what I recollect as well. I wanted to follow up on the first part of Nick's comment, just check with Bob. In terms of the fiscal 21 budget, how much COVID money is there in that already? Because I know it probably would only represent at most 6 months worth, because there was this federal reimbursement through December. So there's probably 6 months in there. And the budget is based off that new higher number with the COVID money in it. So nominally, we probably have a little bit of a COVID buffer already established.
Yeah, at November town meeting, we're asking for, let's see. I'll say $340,000 of additional flexibility for COVID expenses that we don't necessarily know about for the second half of the year. For the first half of the year, I don't remember the number, but I know it was smaller than that. So let's just say there's 500,000 after November town meeting. But that is not built in the base budget for next year. That's thought to be one-time COVID expenses.
Got it.
So when we're talking about the operating budget, there is zero in for next year for COVID. If that answers.
Thank you. Got it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. So, any other, kind of thoughts from committee members on that, following on kind of Nick's comments and questions on, the free cash usage? do folks, so again, there's, kind of, again, to Bob's point, kind of two schools of thought. Do would we want to look at this, looking at, the percentages as, kind of Bob laid out on one of those slides, or working backwards, from the, the 17, million that, we have in, kind of free cash now, things of that nature. Any thoughts on that? And then, Sean, I see your hand raised. I'll call you in a second. All right, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, just kind of my recollection is, generally speaking, what we would call like a level service budget. Bob looks something like 2 3/4 to 3 1/4%. So it's kind of on the, it's kind of on the bottom end of that spectrum. Anything below that, and absent some major savings on health insurance or something like that, anything below that, and we're likely tightening belts next year across the budgets. So just throw that out there.
Yep. Thank you. That's helpful.
So I had at a prior discussion with Mark, I think in one of these meetings, and I think I had talked about coming out around 2.4 in free cash. That was the number when I had looked through the packet and the numbers. I haven't heard anything since that has changed my view on that, and I had a variety of reasons for that I can go over again. But that was a comment I had made a couple meetings ago, and I haven't been persuaded otherwise, but I'm still open to other ideas. That's an absolute number, not a percentage. So it's 2.4 million in free cash.
Yeah, so just under 3.5% of the operating budget, correct?
Yes, Ed, that's right.
Again, I concur. Based on the the conversations that that we had. It was either the last meeting or the meeting before. They all, I can't recall the exact one, but I agree. I think those were the I think if I wasn't verbally doing it, I was nodding in my head as you kind of presented and talked through some of that. Tom, sorry, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just to add on to Sean's level service budget, and probably just to kind of align with what you're saying too. If we look back in the last couple of years since the override, schools have gone up 3.6% in 2020 and 3.5% in 2021. So if that helps you directionally, I guess I would then, to that end, err on the lower side of that overall chart, thinking percentage-wise higher number, but it's on the lower side of the chart.
And to be clear, we're not constrained to this chart just as a group, right? So we should do what's best for the town. This is a proposal from the town manager. But...
Yeah, it's just an illustration, not even a proposal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, which is again better than us kind of scratching on a piece of paper on our own. So I again appreciate the having it a visual to be able to compare against.
Ed, can I ask a question of both Bob and John?
Please.
Knowing that union negotiations are coming up, and I want to say inability of pulling in new talent into both the town and the district at the current pay levels, are we thinking that any of this is going to go towards those negotiations, upping salaries and having that ability to pull in the talent? We've got a lot of open positions right now that we're worried to fill, that we're not at market compared to some of the towns around us. And we need to figure out a way of getting there, not only on the school side, but making sure our town stays well staffed as well. So is there any consideration on that?
So John, that's a bigger conversation that we would need to have with the school committee in executive session.
And on the town side, we have less union representation than most towns, and certainly the school, about 50-50. But I have noticed lately when we're trying to hire non-union positions that people don't seem too concerned about 10 or 12% unemployment. We are having a hard time hiring people, which is not what I would have expected by now for whatever reason. And well, it's money, but I don't know why people feel so comfortable walking away from a good job offer thinking they'll get another one. I hope they do. So yeah, competitive salaries is always a challenge in the municipal sector. But you know, no matter what the number is, we're not going to be forking it all over to employees. We can't afford that.
No, but are we able to look at our peer towns and make sure we're level set with like positions so that we're getting the talent that they're getting?
You know, that's something I would like to do on a regular basis, John, but it's so hard to measure things right now in any way. You know, 2 years, could we do a salary survey and compare? Yeah, I would hope so. I don't know that we'd get much done if we tried to do it now, but I agree with you philosophically. I just don't have a number to give you where it's like this works and this doesn't. It's just we always have to just do the best we can. And generally speaking, people don't work in local government because they can get rich. That's not why they come.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? On the free cash, you know, again, I know Nick and I weighed in. Anybody else have thoughts? Or maybe we can table that and have that kind of be a, you know, a topic of discussion for the meeting on the, what's our next meeting, the 4th. And maybe that's something that I you know, I think that's something, I mean, you know, having this information, some of the stuff that we've talked about tonight, you know, that I think this is a good, you know, kind of follow on discussion for the 4th.
You know, Ed, if it's helpful, you know, if FinCom wants to give us some sense of an operating budget tonight, we could then attend your next meeting and talk more about things like how much money would we think we would need for COVID? What's an easy number to cut out of capital if you're interested, and just give you more specifics instead of having a general discussion. And that might allow you to make kind of the total free cash spend decision a little easier.
I mean, I get the sense that would help everybody, you know, on that level. I mean, I'm seeing a few nodded heads too. I think that might be helpful.
But it would be helpful tonight to get some sort of guidance about, you know, what do you want us to target our operating budgets to be, and then figure out later exactly how to get there.
And so, and again, from this gets to the slide you had about from the operating budgets, you know, whether it's, you know, using, you know, anywhere from, you know, 2 to 2.5, you know, bottom end of that scale. Yeah, that slide there. And again, I know Nick and I, you know, kind of just, you know, kind of agreed that we were kind of both thinking that it was around the 2.4 million range. I just want to make sure that I wrote my number down right, Nick, based on what we were talking about.
I mean, that's where I was in the past conversation. I'm still open to other ideas, but that is the number I quoted, and that was my impression from the last couple meetings. So again, it's an open discussion, and I'm I'm persuadable either way, but that based on everything I've heard, that's kind of where I'm sitting.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Again, any other, kind of comments from the committee as it relates to, make a little bit more pointedly towards, kind of 2.4 million from free cash.
Ed, this is Eric.
Yeah, this is
Go ahead, Eric.
Just making a quick point that I was in alignment with that rationale and thinking.
yeah. This is Sean. I also think that sort of amount and looking at that operating budget on the percentage level, that makes sense. I think it almost needs to be towards the bottom of that scale. I think what Bob was alluding to with some notional idea in terms of the expenses that we might see on the COVID side, even going beyond that. So, I mean, I would be comfortable even going beyond that, at least here in this budget for 22, again, given the unknown of COVID. But I just don't feel comfortable saying what number that might be without sort of some additional information. I just sort of feel like I'd be picking at straws, but I would certainly be comfortable going beyond, what might even be in that chart if we think it's realistic, given what the town might see on that COVID expense side.
So Bob, again, from our perspective, is this, and again, a more kind of procedural thing, is this something that we necessarily need to like vote on, as a group, or like, and if we have, to kind of give you that communication?
We know where to find you. I don't think a vote's necessary. I'll translate what you're saying into what I think I'm hearing in round numbers. You're looking at a 3.25% operating budget, round numbers again. So, John and I can work with that assumption. And then, the thing that is a little bit frightening is, we could plan to meet with you every month and you might hear a very different story every month as things change. So we have to try to kind of look beyond that as best we can and kind of, have our eye on the horizon, as it were. Again, we'll try to get a sense of what's some capital that we could cut easily, more easily than others. Do we want to borrow for the ladder truck? And then, how do we approach COVID? John and I used to see each other regularly. We don't drop in and just see each other. So we really have not talked about budgets for next year. We're just kind of dealing with this year. But, we really do need to catch up. And, allowing us to come back in early November in just a few weeks, we can have that discussion.
And Nick, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so a couple things, Bob, that would be helpful for me. One would be if we could get the chart you made of the different ideas in slide, I think it's 13, the free cash usage, kind of centered around maybe 2.25 with some more steps up and down, because that seems to be where the center of gravity is in the group right now. But give us some options that are centered where the group is centered right now. So maybe centered at 2.25 and then go up and down from there equally. And then secondly, for both the schools and the town, it would be helpful as we think toward vaccines next year and what that might look like. And so we help us think through as a group the possible COVID contingencies as subject matter experts. What might that look like? So on the school side, obviously, we don't know if schools will be open, if they'll be hybrid, if there'll be more demand for learning online, nursing, staffing. I don't know what that might look like. And then Bob, on the town side, Board of Health, what might the demands be as we look at maybe more testing, contact tracing, shutdowns, limited shutdowns. I don't even know what the universe might look like, but you have the best experts we have available between you and the superintendent. So I'd really appreciate just it's a very difficult time for everybody, but you guys are certainly going to be better at guessing than I know I would be. So give us a sense of what the impact is of when we throw a number out and you kind of build up a budget, give us a sense of what's the impact going to be to our citizens and students and everybody next time we meet. That would be helpful. And I realize everything is, we haven't been here before, and these are all best guesses. So I appreciate that, but I also appreciate your insight as just kind of trying to contingency plan on the universe of possibilities. Because I'm sure there are connections that we just don't appreciate sitting here in a committee.
Thanks, Nick. Chuck, you didn't, did you have your hand up? Did you put it down?
Yeah, Nick had said some of the things I was gonna say, so I'm good. Thank you.
No, no worries.
Although having said, since you had, so I just want to make sure the well, Nick may have just changed it, but the 2.4 million is exclusive of any COVID expenses, correct? Or are you including that in that when you say use 2.4? Because I don't think we should be talking about, or at least trying to nail down any COVID expenses. We don't know what's going to happen with Congress. You know, what impact could happen with the election. We don't know what's going to happen with the grant that ends, well, we know now it ends at the end of the year, but who knows, that could get extended. So I think it's really hard to put anything on COVID right now, and other than just keeping, as I think Nick just said, just keeping a real close eye on it all the time and meeting weekly. But to sit here tonight and try and put any number for COVID is just, I don't think it makes any sense. I think any discussion on what we use for free cash should be exclusive of it, as if we didn't have COVID and we were just doing things like we would normally do with a budget.
No, as I said, for me, Ed, that was the number based on what information I have. And that's a good clarifying point, Chuck, that, you know, based on what I know, that's the number I had. And that's why I'm asking the town manager and superintendent for more information on anything in addition to that. That's exactly what I'm saying. Thanks.
Sorry, Ed, I didn't mean to.
No, it's exactly, that's why I called you, Chuck. I knew you had something. So again, so I think that's, I think that kind of, I mean, at least kind of gives you a little bit of an indication, Bob, you know, based on, you know, kind of what, you know, what you're asking for. It gives you a little bit of a, you know, kind of gives you that indication, then you can kind of put some stuff together for us for the 4th. Any other, you know, kind of questions for, since we have this open around, there probably isn't, about free cash or you know, the 22 budgets at all. Because I'm getting better at this. We're going to move on to approving minutes, but before I do that, I'm going to let all of the committees, I'll start with you, Mark.
Thanks, Ed. Carlo, would you have a motion for us, please?
Sure, thank you. Motion to adjourn the select board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Karen. Any discussion? No, let's take a roll call vote here. Carlo?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
And Mark votes yes. So the select board is adjourned. Thank you, folks.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Good night. Chuck.
Tom, do you have a
Motion to adjourn the school committee?
second? Seconded by Sean. Sean?
Yes.
Carla?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
And Tom?
Yes.
And Chuck, yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
thanks,
Good
everybody.
night.
All right, good. Okay, so I'm getting better at that. I didn't leave them hanging for an extra 10, 15 minutes. So that's good. You know, if this is what, you know, you get these rhythms, Bob, of having these every 2 weeks, I'll get better. But, you know, by April, these things will be humming along. All right, good. So let's kind of look over, and we can basically look over the meeting minutes from, oh, actually, well, let me, before we go to meeting minutes, any other kind of topics of discussion for the 4th for our, you know, so we basically, you know, have a meeting in 2 weeks. Outside of, you know, you know, the pieces around the free cash and operating budget, et cetera. Any other, you know, kind of topics, you know, from the committee that we needed to raise, or anything else that we think that we might need to address?
Hey, Ed, it's Andrew.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey, mine, I guess, is more towards Bob for some of the liaison positions that we have. Do they not send out regular emails to notify us when all the meetings are? I've missed a few meetings here or there, and I'm not getting any notification of when they are.
I'll have to look, because, you know, board meeting schedules are very variable right now, so I really don't know.
Okay, I was just curious. I haven't seen, the school committee is very proactive on getting their emails out.
Okay.
And I still receive those from previously, which is great. But I
You can't unsubscribe.
Yeah, I haven't received anything from public services and/or you know, I guess select board, but they meet frequently. So.
Okay, yeah, we'll check.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Anything from anybody else? Okay, so if no other business, then we can go and review the meeting minutes from, I have it here, but I don't remember the date. There it is. The 7th.
October 7th, I think.
Yep, from the 7th. Any you know, kind of questions, comments around the meeting minutes? Oh, actually, I do have one for you, Bob. So as it relates to upcoming town meeting, I got to write this cover page, right?
No, I don't think so. I remember thinking at one point that the FinCom would do a report, but that's only annual. I forgot we weren't doing annual. So if I said something, it's not accurate for November. You know, it's a bit more difficult because of remote. Normally, you could just ask the moderator that you'd like to say a few words, for instance, on the financial shape of the town. You're certainly welcome to do that. I can send you an email with his address. But he did ask for reports in writing, and they're already in the warrant report. So I just don't know how that would work.
Okay, good. That's fine. I don't want to sign up for extra work.
You don't know anything.
I don't want to sign up for extra work. And then, so then just kind of procedurally then, as we kind of go through the motions, that'll still kind of, that FinCom report will still kind of come to me as the moderator goes through it.
Unless you wanted to sign it to Eric.
I think so, but no, I mean, that's fine. I mean, you know, but I'm okay to keep it. But you know, that piece of it just kind of procedurally will still happen versus having something kind of at the top line written out. It'll just come to me for the motion.
I don't know if you have any of you have received the town meeting warrant report. It was mailed, I don't know, a couple days ago. You ought to see it by the weekend, certainly. That has all the FinCom reports, just if you need them in one place. The only additional document I can think of the town meeting members will get electronically is the motions. And we have those, we just didn't include it as part of the warrant report. So again, in theory, if someone had something to say to town meeting, you know, we still have an opportunity to do that. So I don't want to shut you out, but just in terms of the articles as voted, yeah, it's easier to have one member say, this is what FinCom did, this is the date, and this is why.
Need to work on the whys a little bit, but yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think everything else is pretty good. No, that sounds good. That's helpful. I just want to make sure. I think I was confusing, last town meeting and what Eric created for that. And again, I thought it was something that we would need because it was virtual versus, the annual part of it. So that helps clarify it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, we have a motion to, I'm willing to entertain a motion about the minutes for anybody.
Motion to accept the October 7th minutes.
Second.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Dan. All right, we'll go to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Marianne,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
and Sean.
Yes.
And Ed is a yes. That is 8-0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8-0. Excellent. Seeing as we don't have any other business, I will accept another motion if.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Andrew.
Second.
All right, let's take it to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Marianne,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Ed. 8-0. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.